Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this LawTech London discussion that we have entitled Act Like a Robot, Be Replaced by One. Just to make you aware, the event tonight is being recorded, so you will be able to access it at a later date. This idea for this webinar this evening, this discussion, came from a chat amongst the esteemed panellists that happened a couple of months ago. And they were speculating on whether the future of lawyering is a somewhat dystopian one, in which machines will eventually replace so much of what we lawyers do. And that only a handful of highly specialist lawyers will remain in demand. Or are we more optimistic than that about our future? And if we are, what do we need to be doing to ensure that we shape the version of the future that we want to see? And we could not wish for a better qualified lineup of panellists with whom to have this conversation. They have great examples of being brave pioneers in their areas who have pushed through and forward in boundaries of innovation in their fields. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined this evening by Sharon Kaur, who is an industry expert and thought leader in legal technology, with many years of experience in the legal industry as corporate counsel, M&A lawyer and consultant, working with law firms, in-house legal teams and legal technology startups. I'm also delighted to be joined by David Turney. David started his career with Allen & Overy and then worked in-house before founding virtual law firm Avery Law almost a decade ago. And this was truly visionary back then because most people didn't even know what virtual meant. It is no surprise that David was shortlisted for the Rising Star Innovation Award at the Legal Innovation Awards in 2020. And last but not least, we're joined by Nick Watson. Nick comes from a web development background, having worked on hundreds of projects across many industries, including, of course, legal tech. He launched virtual data room platform Ruby Datum. He has launched Legal Legends, guiding companies on legal technology. He has been a mentor for Barclays Eagle Labs, the Legal Forecast Connect, and is an advisor for the Centre of Legal Innovation in Australia. And so, we have not only an eminently qualified panel this evening, but also one that covers many angles, from practicing law through to law tech development and legal ops consultancy, which is important because the audience we have for the session this evening is also diverse, including senior lawyers and those, of course, just starting out in their career, private practice lawyers and in-house lawyers, tech developers and consultants, and you're all very welcome. And we want to make sure that this discussion will be of interest to every single one of you. And for those eagle-eyed people out there, you can see that I am not Tony Randall, but I am indeed his colleague at Shoesmith. I'm Caroline White-Robinson, and I lead the development team here at Shoesmith. We've just got an hour for this discussion, and I know the time is going to pass very, very quickly. So the panel will be very happy to take your questions as we go along, or of course, do please send in your questions using the chat function. And we have a dedicated session at the end to address those questions. But without further ado, I'm going to start the discussion. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you for joining us. It's been said that robots will never replace the legal profession, but lawyers who use tech will replace lawyers that don't. What would your views be on that? David, can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Firstly, thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. It's always a pleasure. I mean, absolutely, that statement is true to a point, that the fact that robots, in my view, will never replace lawyers. You know, I've always said that there's a great innovation train steaming through the legal profession at the moment. And if you don't sort of get on that train, you're going to potentially be left behind at the station. You know, lawyers really need to embrace technology and use it to enhance the service that they provide to their clients.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Sharon, I know you've got some thoughts in this area as well.
Yeah, I do. Again, like David, really happy to be here. So thank you. My thoughts on this are, it's, you know, most law firms recognize that they need to get on the tech train, using David's phrase. Most of them want to do it. They just don't know how to pivot to do it. So I think it's a question of getting people more aware of what's around. You know, at the moment, there's so much tech out there, and people are starting to wonder. I think the word replace perhaps is better. The word overtake is probably a better phrase to use rather than replace lawyers, because we will always need lawyers who don't use tech, And the ability to offer both sort of a human lawyer plus tech is going to be, is going to be the answer. I just add to that though, that we see tech as threatening, but we've been using discovery platforms for nigh on 20 years and machine learning platforms, but no one's saying I miss those days when I had hundreds of pages of contracts to review. So why should we feel more threatened by any other tech that's coming along?
I think that's really interesting, and it's certainly an emotion that nobody likes, that threat detection almost. So I'd be interested, Nick, what your thoughts on this are.
I think it will replace lawyers, but only some of them, only the bad ones. The ones that copy and paste terms and conditions from a template and then just update the names. The lawyers that will truly kind of thrive with tech are the ones that are going to actually take the time to listen to their clients, understand the commercials, and then kind of build the contracts with technology that will automate, the kind of repetitive side of things, and actually, allow them to have more time to, just spend with their clients, to listen.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned listening, and I think that's a great skill. Certainly, we would want to encourage all lawyers to do more of. It certainly sounds from what you've said that everyone agrees that the future involves people and tech. It's not one or the other, so it's not just people or tech. And so if we want lawyers to distinguish themselves from the robots, what skills do you think lawyers need to develop going forward? Nick, if I could come back to you on that point.
Good question. I think, we obviously mentioned listening already. I think ultimately that comes down to empathy. And I do quite a bit of work with the SEL, and we're talking about how we can introduce empathy more into law earlier on. Because obviously there's a legal side of things, there's a legalese and, understanding the technical side. But I think where the law often falls down and where technology can help is, when it comes to, say, for example, you've got a contract that you want drafted, and the typical response is to bring that request to a lawyer who will then go and, kind of draft that contract, covering as many points as possible to make sure you're protected. But in reality, you take that to the party you're negotiating with, and they'll come back with a load of red line. And you go backwards and forwards. It costs a lot of money, and eventually you meet somewhere in the middle. I've worked with these kinds of scenarios before, and I've had contracts drafted for Ruby Data, and we've taken a look at some of the things that get drafted, and it's been pretty extreme and very unlikely scenarios to happen. And I get these contracts that have to address many points, but there's a point where you have to draw the line between what's realistic and what's risky. And I think that's going to be an ultimate skill in the future of lawyering, because I've met lawyers with MBEs and have taken courses in business, et cetera, and they seem to really understand the commercials a lot more. So I think that business intelligence is quite important. Anyway, yeah. I'm talking quite a lot now. I'm aware there's other panelists.
Well, what I took from that was, the commerciality piece, but also this empathy piece, and making sure that views are not polarized on either end. And empathy, that would be certainly something that I think is everybody can develop at whatever stage they are in their career. Forgive me, I'm just going to read from something now, because I saw a really interesting quote the other day, and it was from a tech columnist in the New York Times. And they said, good lawyers will become more like legal therapists, creating trust with clients and helping to solve their problems, rather than simply writing briefs and doing research. And I think that really, not clarifies, but, substantiates just what you've said, Nick. Your thoughts, Sharon, on that?
I'd echo everything Nick has said. Empathy, listening, understanding, support. These are all skills that most professionals, if you're not just lawyers, require in their day-to-day. But interesting, I just wanted to pick up on a point that Nick mentioned in terms of empathy. There are actually lots of studies that show people prefer, in certain areas, interacting with their a bot or a robot or a virtual assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking around things like sexual harassment, whistleblowing, and those sorts of things, where the people feel more able to be open with a bot because the element of judgment is taken out of the equation, so people can have more honest conversations. That's not to say that on every instance you should have a bot, but I think the successful firms will be the ones who are able to offer both tech and a human lawyer, and
Mm-hmm.
and not just offer it, but also to have the awareness of when to use one or the other or both together. So it's not going to be a case of we'll lose lawyers, but there are going to be sort of more skills around commercial biz dev that people need to become more aware of.
I absolutely love what you've just said there about the client centricity piece, putting the client at the heart of this. What is it that works for the client? And certainly hearing you talk about something like a sexual harassment issue, I'd never really thought about how that bot could, that anonymity, that lack of judgment could actually be really beneficial for a client. It's really interesting. David, would you have any thoughts on, what are these skills? We've talked about empathy, listening, understanding the client. Anything else you'd like to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, to mirror what everyone else has said, I mean, it is very important. I mean, one thing that we do at Avery Law is we invest a lot of upfront time without charging to understand what does the client actually want to do? What does this piece of work involve? And that's my investment in the relationship. And I think that sort of goes towards the empathy piece because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of a robot on the market that can do that yet. Once it does, then we can have this conversation again, and maybe I'll say something else. That I think is a very important part of what I call a next generation lawyer, and we spend a lot of time with our trainees, and in terms of developing that as part of their training contract. Building that awareness and that client concentricity, trying to work out what they want.
Well, I think I would definitely say that that's on my agenda as the head of people development. I think as well the industry is changing with projects such as the O-shaped lawyer that I know has hit the legal press recently, and the fact that the emphasis is not just on the lawyering anymore, it's on all of the other skills that lawyers can bring to the mix to be these trusted advisors that clients so desperately want and need. I think, just for the clarity, I think we might have lost Nick, so I don't know if he'll be joining us back again, but we will try and get him back for you in terms of the discussion. I'd like to break now just so that we can have a poll. So I'm just going to launch a poll here to get the audience's views, and that is, do you agree with the fact that the reward structure in law firms, let me just check this is the right poll. I think actually, apologies. Okay, this is the right question. I was thinking they need to link up. So do you agree that more emphasis should be given to human skills training for our junior lawyers in the future? That makes much more sense than the previous question. So if you could use your buttons now from the audience, that would be great. We can get a view on that. Wow. I think there might need to be a late surge from the no's to overtake the yeses. I think we've got about half of you who have voted. So if we just give the rest of you maybe 30 seconds more just to cast your votes. If there's anybody definitely out there who says no, it'd be really interesting to hear if you've got any thoughts on that. Pop it in the chat box for us so that we could put it to the panel. Got some more yeses coming in. Okay, so it feels like a resounding yes. We do agree that we should be giving human skills training for junior lawyers in the future. How do we think that's going to happen, though, in this virtual world that, you know, the pandemic has shown us that we can work from home, and here at Shoesmiths, you know, I've been here 15 years, we would have normally brought junior lawyers into a room, got them together to do that kind of training, and the on-the-job training, as it were, when they were listening to their colleagues in the office. How do you think we're going to take that forward then? It's clear that they want that training. David, I can see you're nodding there. I'm going to come to you first, if I may.
I was agreeing with you. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the sort of, you know, the working from home aspect of and / being in an office, and actually, you know, I remember at A&O when you would sit in an office with a senior associate or a partner, and you would just hear everything that happened. So naturally, you would gain insights, and obviously with what is happening in the current, you know, the current world, like how will that happen? You know, will it be similar to when you go to the dentist or you go to a doctor and they say, "Oh, do you mind if so and so joins us? They're training." But what's wrong with that? You know, what's wrong with just being completely open and honest and transparent to a client? If a client says no, I mean, obviously you will agree to that, but I can't imagine someone's going to say no. You know, maybe that's the way we go. And with these online calls, we invite our trainees in to initial phone calls with potential new clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I would agree with you. You know, if you can sit quietly in the background and just observe and listen, I would struggle to hear what you know, what the challenges or disadvantages of that would be. But Sharon, I don't know if you've got any thoughts that maybe contradict that or agree with it.
No, I'm really passionate about this, and junior lawyers and the skills. But I think we need to take several steps back. So while it's great to think that, you know, we're going to be helping junior lawyers get skilled in this area, the fact is, you know, we incentivize certain behaviors, and the incentivize, you know, the incentives that law firms offer are based on sort of billing targets and hours billed, which is really perverse because our clients, on the other hand, want things done relatively inexpensively and quickly. So I think there has to be a change on that front, and more so with alternative funding arrangements, unbundling of legal services, more commoditization. Legal services are becoming more homogenous. You will need to find some other way of distinguishing yourself from the crowd, and you know, and that may well be those EQ type skills that you have that keeps bringing your clients back.
Absolutely. EQ, I mean, that's a really interesting topic, and we could probably spend, a whole session just talking about EQ. And I find it interesting because a lot of people in my world would say that EQ is it's decidedly soft. It's the soft skills, and actually the soft skills are sometimes much more difficult to obtain and master than any of the technical skills. You know, it takes practice. It takes coming back to things time and time again. I'd be really interested off the poll that we've just had. At what point do you think junior lawyers really need to start thinking about this? Is this something they should be thinking about at university, or is it in their training contract or the formative years when they're with their employer? Anybody got any views? I'm conscious, Nick, I don't want to throw you in at the deep end because you lost connectivity on us, but hopefully you've caught up.
Yeah, I turned it off and back on, and yeah.
Can I come to you, David? I mean, I know you joined Allen and Overy many years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking. I mean, you know, obviously without mentioning platforms like LinkedIn. I mean, what is really interesting is that I've seen a culture of, you know, call them aspiring solicitors, but actually they brand themselves as aspiring solicitors in their LinkedIn profiles. And that's fantastic, you know, and they are sort of doing everything they need to sort of create this culture already, you know, at a university stage. And I think that's great. And the one thing I think that's really important as junior lawyer is giving them that space, giving them this sort of zone to empower them to make suggestions. You know, and I think giving people space and not being so authoritarian and I'm the boss, this is what you need to do by 9 o'clock tomorrow. It creates that culture of empathy and human interaction, which naturally creates what I believe is a better lawyer.
Mm-hmm. So there's definitely something in there around people taking ownership for this. You mentioned the lawyers out there who were kind of branding themselves aspiring, etc. And there's definitely something in there around the culture and being able to perform at your best, particularly with those emotional emotional intelligence pieces. I guess a fundamental distinction between robots and humans is that machines cannot make you emote. Do you think that in the future lawyers will distinguish themselves more based on how they made a client feel rather than what they did for the client? Sharon, can I come to you on that?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to my point on your behavior and the incentives. So while it sounds great, the fact is, I can't remember the last time a law firm that I've worked with sent out a feedback or a survey. So it's almost as if job done, I've completed the matter, I've done the interaction, and the rest of it doesn't really matter. So I think there will be a drive, perhaps, and more so because I've just said that there's so much more commoditization. Everything is more homogenous. You need to find your own USP. And if that means that you've got to, that's client satisfaction, then that's what you've got to incentivize. So I know that previously there have been law firms who have moved from the billing target and the hours to a more sort of client satisfaction. So your bonus is tied to your client satisfaction. And I think if that's the behavior that you want to drive, that has to be the behavior that you incentivize.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Nick, I'm conscious we haven't heard from you for a little bit. Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think in order to incentivize that behavior, this whole culture around the billable hour, and I hate to say it because I know it gets said every single year for the past 10 years, the billable hour does need to die, but it really does in order for the space to be created, because it's no good spending, the office hours to 3 a.m. because it's incentivized. It's important to, allow yourself that space to work on yourself so that you top yourselves up so much with like good energy that you have that overflow to gift to people, and understand them a bit more. If you're working to 3 a.m, you're going to be stressed, you'll be making mistakes lead to more hours, and it's just a vicious cycle. I think actually we need to introduce a culture of actually, rather than patting people on the back for working ridiculous hours, you actually reward them for working sensible hours.
I always pose the question that, if you're going to go into hospital tomorrow and have an operation, which doctor would you want operating on you? The one that's been up 24 hours or the one that's had a good night's rest?
Yeah.
You'd probably want the one that has a good night's rest. And I don't. Sorry, go ahead.
And the one that's had the good night's rest and actually uses modern sophisticated tools to do the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to open another poll now, and that is, do you think that law firms will need to focus as much on the experience that their clients have as on their legal work product? And I think this plays really nicely into Sharon and what you said about the fact that, where's the client experience in all of this, and the questionnaire and the feedback. So I can just launch that now for you. You should be able to see that.
I'd just like to throw it out there. It could be both.
Well, I was going to say, do I have my lawyer's hat on or my client's hat on? It's a really interesting question, this.
And it's interesting to see that we've got a few more no's in this question than we had last time. So maybe we can think about both sides of the question.
I mean, I can go straight in just in terms of, I can give you an example. Today, I was asked to provide a legal opinion. And there's an element, when you need to be a lawyer, sometimes the opinion that you come up with is not particularly what the client wants to hear. So there are these stages where you very much have to focus on the legal work product, right? You are a lawyer, there's a code, you can only do certain so much. So
Yeah.
obviously the client's not happy in that situation, but I can completely see the reverse, where obviously being client-centric, we focus on our clients' satisfaction needs and make sure we can try and deliver a product, but sometimes it's just not possible to link the two.
Okay. Nick, you said you had a thought on this as well. You can see it from both sides.
Yeah, the answer is always yes until something goes wrong, and then all of a sudden, you know, having all bases covered is so important at stage. It's like insurance, right? You know, you can go through the insurance package that offers you a £50 M&S voucher, and it sounds amazing at the time, but then actually when you need to make a claim, if the insurance company suddenly gets out on some small print or something like that, it's a big problem. So the client's happy if, you know, you're skirting over all of these points until actually like something serious happens. And, you know, lawyers spend a lot of time in that sphere of dealing with things as they go wrong. So the answer for them is most likely going to be no. But from the client's perspective, it's always yes until something does go wrong. So
Yeah.
It's about a balancing act, I think.
Yeah. Do you think there's an element in there that bridges the gap between it's not what you have to say, it's the way in which you say what you have to say? So there's you can say no to somebody and not explain it, and they're left in limbo thinking, well, where did that come from? Or you can do the whole, you know, we're talking about skills here, aren't we? So you can do the, no, you can't have that. However, this is what we've looked at, which has got us to the no, and we understand and we empathize that's maybe not where you need to be or want to be. And if we could, we would, which is a very different message to the person who takes the egotistical, arrogant view, which is it's a no, and that's based on my legal experience, and that's all you're going to get. Is that fair?
I think being able to explain things as well in analogies. So, for example, you know, if you understand the client's business, you say, and they ask you what this clause means, it's like, oh, you need that in there because things go wrong. It will, you know, it will really mean a lot. But actually, they provide an analogy like that. The client goes, well, if this happens, then this clause comes into effect. And in your industry, we've seen it happen in this, and this. I'm struggling to think of an example in particular, but hopefully I'm articulating the point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that we've been talking about, you know, the skills of all of this, and we've been talking about culture, and we've, you know, there are people within those cultures who sit, I suppose, at the top of the tree or further up the tree in terms of leadership. Is it just the juniors then that need to develop these skills or develop their skills? What must partners in law firms be doing if their people and their firms are to thrive? Sharon, any thoughts?
Yeah. I think there's a lot that the senior leadership can do. I think as far as juniors, you know, junior lawyers and learning those skills, they ought to really be starting as soon as possible, and perhaps even in law school, so that by the time they're actually entering the profession, they've come equipped with those skills. There's then going to be a disconnect between them and their empathy and what the senior leadership are you know, what culture, because culture's, you know, ultimately determined by your leadership and how they react and view themselves and how they behave around juniors. So, you know, you have that very dictatorial managing partner who says you've got to stay till 9 to do the reviews. But the first thing I think that would be really helpful is for senior lawyers and managing partners and sort of the board to really get into a room and share their vulnerabilities. I mean, you know, I've been practicing for many years, but I remember making mistakes. So, and we've seen recently there have been several examples of where junior lawyers have either been suspended or not allowed to practice because they've not been, you know, they've not owned up to mistakes that they've made, and that's really sad, and that speaks more to the culture of the law firm than it does to people making mistakes. And so I think there is a lot senior leadership can do. It will be dictated by them. So they really need to get on board with changing that culture. It takes time, but you need to start somewhere.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And in terms of anybody who thinks, I suppose, that these are soft skills, as we mentioned before, there's a lot of research coming out now to say these are skills that senior leaders should have. There's a great piece of work done by a lady called Dr. Brené Brown on the power of vulnerability and the power of bringing people through with your own mistakes. And of course, I don't know if any of you have read the book Matthew Syed's Black Box Thinking, which is where the aviation airline reduced the number of disasters they had simply because they put a black box in there and an amnesty around admitting your mistakes, coming and learning from them, and creating a culture of learning rather than blame. I think it's really interesting. David, have you got any thoughts on what you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Sharon said. I mean, I think, traditional law firms in that sense, I just think back to my A&O days when I used to think of the partners and sort of shiver in my shoes. You didn't want to go and knock on their door. That was that sort of atmosphere. I mean, that's obviously stereotyping. There was obviously people in those days that you could go and approach. But yeah, totally. The culture of sort of or inviting that space where I call it like 360 feedback. So the feedback is not just on the junior lawyers. It's actually, well, what's the feedback your way as well? How can you better yourself as a senior lawyer or a managing partner, etc. I'm a great sort of spokesperson, but I think it's really important. And I always try and encourage people, if you're not happy, please feel free to talk to me, because I think and I can say, well, that's selfish, because actually I know that if I do that, they're going to do a much better job. And that's the reality, because they feel empowered. And I think it goes back to that happiness culture. What incentivizes you to work with this particular law firm? Is it money? Is it, working from home? Or is it just a really good, team feel?
Yeah, we spend a lot of our life at work. It may as well be fun while we're there, hey? Nick, what are your thoughts?
Vulnerabilities are quite a fascinating one, I find, for law, because so much of the profession is about avoiding vulnerability, whether it's in a contract or a negotiation in a deal or something. But likewise, a lot of the profession can be about preying on vulnerability as well. Right. It's almost like it's a taboo subject. To be vulnerable yourself goes against a lot of kind of what you're taught as a lawyer. I think, obviously it stems from the top down, but I think as junior lawyers are being taught as well, this needs to be incorporated early on and regularly as well. People need to be checking in once a week in groups, bringing people together actively to disclose vulnerabilities and talk to each other. And there needs to be more awareness that, this lawyer persona is not you. It's what you have to do for the job. And you are a separate entity. You have to keep them separate. And this has to be brought in, and people have to be reminded again and again and again that these two are very separate. And that's all I've got to say, actually.
Well, I'm fascinated by the idea of vulnerability, and that, culturally there seems to be something more that we can do around this area of vulnerability. As somebody who coaches with individuals, you can see that when somebody is able to learn from, acknowledge their vulnerability and then learn what they need to learn in order to build on that, they become resilient. And the more resilient, somebody famous, I can't remember who it was, but they said, once you're stretched, you never regain your original dimensions. And that's where we build resilience time and time again. But if you're hiding things, metaphorically under the duvet, waiting to get caught someday, that's a huge pressure to have to carry around. And I think that, for me, that just goes into a downward spiral, really. Sorry, go on ahead, Nick.
So as someone once said to me, the most vulnerable person out there is the one that's got so many secrets to hide. They're so scared of being found out.
Yeah, wow. Very powerful words indeed. In terms of the audience, then I'm just going to come to a poll to get your thoughts. So let's just move to that, if I may. And this is our final question. And this really plays into the culture that we've been talking about. And Sharon, I know this is dear to your heart. Do you agree that the reward structure in law firms should acknowledge the importance of human skills more than they do currently? So I know we were talking back about the reward systems and how they emphasize the billable hours and the effect that that has on the individual then as well. Okay, looks like we're still on a yes on this question, but a few less people have, I think, voted on this, or perhaps you've just lost a few of the audience. Maybe it's dinner time in people's houses and they've got to go. They're slowly but surely creeping up there. So can I ask the panel, have you any ideas on how reward structures should be put together to acknowledge the importance of human skills?
The $1 million question. I think it's really difficult to work out the exact reward structures, but one thing I do know is that you should be able to adjust and revise based on where things are moving. You know, different law firms grow at different rates, and you know, it's a moving target, and I think that's probably, you know, certainly something we look at and we consider as and when we, you know, pivot and move.
Sharon?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with David. I'd probably just add to that I think as we move, we'll never move to one extreme or the other. So I think the way to start thinking about this is to think about having a hybrid type system. So you have an objective parameters and you have subjective parameters. So it could be your objectives are, you know, your billing or your hours or innovation or whatever it is, and then the, you know, the surveys and, you know, from clients, that client satisfaction piece. How have you ranged from 1 to 10? And I know it's difficult because, you know, how you made a client feel is very subjective. But I think we need to move towards a place where we're starting to think that those are worth incentivizing.
Yeah. You mentioned innovation there. I guess we haven't really talked about creativity actually as part of these skills that we're, you know, expecting, I guess, within the legal profession. Just as we move into that, I think, you know, how do you create, how do you teach, or how do you give people innovation as a skill set? There's something very spontaneous there for me. But you are all great examples of how you have distinguished yourselves by being creative in how you do things. How important do you think creativity is going to be for those lawyering in the 21st century? David, any thoughts?
I mean, creativity, innovation, I suppose they go hand in hand, right? I think one thing that's really important is, I mean, we can go back to the fact we haven't really talked about legal tech hugely, in the sense that in today's market, it's like a fairground for legal tech. There's so many amazing products out there, you know, and I suppose often in a traditional law firm, you will have an IT tech team who will sort of trial software, see if they can implement. But actually, you know, why not let junior lawyers or, you know, everyone try it out? And, you know, and as a senior management team, in terms of giving that creativity over to the junior lawyers, you know, let them make suggestions. And I think that sort of goes to that innovation point. You know, it's a culture where everyone should be involved in making suggestions and shouldn't be scared of making a suggestion, how bad or right it is, you know, because I think that's the great thing about where the market is at the moment and how fast it's moving.
Sharon, any thoughts?
Yeah, so just on this, I think creativity, you know, at the risk of sounding like a sales pitch and picking up David's point about, you know, legal tech, and it's often said, you know, you'll reduce your costs, you know, you'll have more time, we'll take away the low value work and the mundane work, you'll have more time to work on higher value stuff. I'd probably just add to that, you also have time to work on more creative stuff. So, you know, and that creativity and law, being a lawyer doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. So once you have more time and you're sort of taking away those the mundane work that you do that you probably can't charge for or you write off, you then have the ability to sort of have more creative drafting. So think more about how you're going to draft your documents. Negotiation, again, it takes a lot of creativity in deciding how you're going to negotiate, what are you going to negotiate on. Innovation, again, you need to be creative about that sort of idea that you've started off with. So I think creativity is there. We just need to give it more prominence and people to have more bandwidth to be able to explore and really sort of become creative. And just on this point, Alice Stevenson from Stevenson Law wrote a brilliant article on why she hires creative lawyers, and I'd sort of encourage anyone to read it, because it does really show that there is so much creativity. We're not robots. We're not sort of working off templates and sort of clause banks. We're actually using our minds to really be creative.
I love that as a theme. Nick, anything you'd like to add on what Sharon has said?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what you said about Alice Stevenson. I think, that law firm is phenomenal, and I think they're doing great things in this space, as well as innovation being technology as well. Legal design seems to be a hot topic at the moment. I'm very fortunate to be working with a lawyer at the moment who's just redrafted all of our contracts. And now we have a very nicely formatted front page. And it has all the key facts on there, like the liability cap, the storage limits, the fees, etc., etc. And since we had it all redrafted, I mean, the terms are pretty much the same, but it's been designed in such a aesthetically pleasing manner that we just, they get digested and sent back to us so quickly now with no pushback. And, that comes from the creativity of it all.
So there's something in there about the creativity and innovation that lawyers possess themselves and how we bring that out of them. And then, that client centricity piece about what the clients enjoy from that. I think it's an absolutely fascinating area. And I wonder which population we start to nurture that creativity or continue to nurture that creativity and innovation, particularly with tech. Some of these tech products, they cost a bit of budget, let's be honest, and a lot of time in terms of implementation or thinking about it, etc. And I do wonder where the decisions for that tech are made. Are they made at the right level? Should it be at the top levels where perhaps they're a little bit more distant from what tech can do or should do for them? And maybe thinking about these junior lawyers, we started tonight's conversation about the junior lawyers, and maybe bringing those junior lawyers in to have fun, to play, to be creative, to do all the things that they're coming out of university, fired up to do. Maybe that's the population that needs to get involved in this. David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think the adoption of tech is, it shouldn't be a sort of split decision. It needs to be thought of in terms of, well, who's actually going to be the lawyer using this on a day-to-day? And, and then the next step being, well, how much time does it save us? And is the client getting any benefit out of it? That's kind of how I look at tech in terms of, will we implement it within the firm?
Okay. I'm conscious of time. We're coming up. We've got a couple of minutes left just before we open for questions and answers from the panel and the audience. I'm going to put you all on the spot now, and this is probably one of the most difficult questions to answer. But if you had to give us one piece of advice, or give a lawyer one piece of advice that would help them thrive in the age of robots, what would you say? Let me come to Nick first on that.
Make time for yourself. Just take a time out of your day, your week, check in with your colleagues, just give yourself a bit more appreciation.
Okay, love it. Really human aspect there. Sharon, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I'd say don't fear tech, but my message is more to sort of law firm leadership is, let your juniors play with what's available. It's coming. There's no, you've got to embrace it. Look at what else is around, where it can benefit you and your practice. But I think underpinning all of this is start thinking about different incentives and how you incentivize people, because everything flows from there.
Lovely. And David?
Yeah, I mean, I think one important thing to think about in terms of the tech and its adoption is that it's not going to replace it's not going to replace lawyers, and certainly the fear aspect, people shouldn't be afraid of it ever replacing us. If it replaces us, then who do the legal tech companies sell it to? I mean, you still need a regulated law firm with PI insurance to sell the legal tech to. Otherwise, you got no lawyers, and we're not going to be doing anything because we've got the Legal Services Act. So, it is just embracing it, making it work for you and your clients.
Lovely. Well, we've opened the floor now. It's bang on 6:15. We've got 15 minutes for questions. If you'd like to send them in, we've had a couple in, and there's one here where one of the audience members is interested to hear the panel's thoughts on what they see as barriers and potentially solutions to law firms adopting technology such as chatbots. Nick, do you want to start us off on that one?
Well, so many barriers. Security is obviously like a huge one. The difficulty for legal tech companies starting up is that they haven't had the chance to prove themselves. And that's always quite a big barrier, because it's lawyers are mitigating risk day in, day out, and a new startup hasn't got the credibility, hasn't got necessarily the track record for people to feel comfortable buying technology from them. So I see that as quite a huge barrier.
Okay. So that credibility, that reputation behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where most the cool kind of innovative tech comes into the picture as well. It's the new startups. There's some amazing companies doing amazing things that they can't quite get the traction, and they disappear quite quickly, which is quite a shame, really.
Okay. Any other thoughts from Sharon and David on an answer to that question?
Go,
Sharon. On, David. You go, David.
I was just going to say, just thinking with my lawyer's hat on, I just see risk. Compliance officers, professional indemnity insurance, potential negligence claims. If you are a regulated law firm, what does that chatbot actually do for you? Does it just point people to the right place on your website, or is it answering questions? If it's answering questions, whoa, suddenly you're in a high risk situation for the firm. So that's a huge issue. And you've obviously got these, what we call unregulated law consultancies or legal consultancies, and you've got your regulated law firms. So and this is probably where I think we all need to try and petition the SRA to sort of make this more attractive, this innovation. But it's a real problem.
Okay. Sharon, I saw there you had a reaction there to what David said.
Yeah, I think it perhaps comes down to what you're using that chatbot for. So if you're using it to give substantial and substantive advice, then the risk element is there. If you're allowing your clients to self-serve relatively easy matters, or just doing FAQs, then it makes sense. So again, it's horses for courses. A lot of firms are very successfully doing it. Lots of firms of legal tech startups have got lots of funding because there is a need for chatbots. The question is, you've got to know where you're going to fit that chatbot in.
Could I just add to that point as well? I think you have to consider the alternative as well, because if someone hasn't got the money to pay for a lawyer, the alternative, and we've seen it happen many times in the past, you copy and paste the terms and conditions from a pizza website. So it's better to have technology that's specialized into creating these things and guiding you through the process for a low cost or free charge than none at all, I think.
Okay.
Can I just add to what Nick has just said? And I think it's a wonderful point. It's about accessibility. So a lot of chatbot companies, and there's one that I'm working with at the moment in Australia. It's called Joseph, and what they're doing is they're doing a lot of accessibility. They're working with community legal centers, so where you're not going to be able to easily gather information or access expertise, the chatbots do a really good job.
Okay. So some interesting thoughts there. We've had another couple of questions come in. A little bit, I think, to the point, David, you made around risk. Do you think PI insurance is a strong influencer on innovation and tech adoption?
I don't know if it's an influencer. I mean, it's definitely something that probably limits some law firms from adopting certain technology, or makes it harder for them to adopt. Obviously we're all in this market, especially during COVID. PI times are difficult at the moment for regulated law firms, but there's plenty of ways to be innovative without worrying about the PI. And I shouldn't have probably mentioned it because it's scaremongering. And I'm a huge fan of tech, and we adopt a lot of it. But it's there, and it's really important that lawyers obviously think about that aspect as well. And it goes to the point of security that Nick mentioned. You have to think about all the elements when you adopt tech. It's not just like, ooh, tech, let's adopt it tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say barriers. And unfortunately, the larger the law firm, the more people that are making decisions, the harder it is to adopt.
Yeah. We've talked a lot in this discussion this evening about the right culture to bring tech in and to enable young lawyers and junior lawyers to thrive. We've got a question in here now, and perhaps Nick and Sharon, you might be interested in answering this one. What would be your advice on encouraging senior leadership / partners to change their approach from a very traditional running of a law firm to support the change and enable young lawyers to change status quo, so to be more creative, adopt tech, collect feedback, and more? Nick?
Wow, it depends who's doing the encouraging, I guess. I can only speak for myself as a LawTech provider and someone that helps people build LawTech projects. We can just keep creating good technology, finding those senior leaders in law firms that really get things and understand things, and spending the time working with them and showcasing that engagement to lead the way. I think it's better to kind of highlight the good things happening and show that, rather than resist what isn't happening, and hopefully they'll get wind of that and see that there's a better way.
Okay. Sharon?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of along the same lines as Nick. I think the fact will remain that you will want to retain, you want to attract and retain the best talent. And the best talent are not going to be, the new millennials who are joining the workforce today have very different expectations from their workplace and their employers. So if you want to attract and retain really good talent, then the old traditional way isn't going to work. It's not a case of we as an industry can't change, because COVID has shown that we can change when we have to, very, very quickly. But I think it's going to be, senior lawyers are going to, and senior managing partners are going to very quickly learn that unless the culture is different, then no one's going to stick around for working 9 to 10 hours a day and hundreds of reviews. People want change.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And my advice out there for any junior lawyers who are in the audience would be, make change really easy for senior leadership to understand, and build your skills to be able to educate them in a way that doesn't make them feel stupid or doesn't trigger those vulnerability pieces in them. We've all heard reciprocal mentoring is out there as a phrase, and for me, I would hope that that's so much more than just a fashionable statement that people bandy about, because I think there's such benefit. I mean, I get a huge amount out of my 8-year-old telling me what I need to do on the iPad or whatever. They're just that way. They're just programmed that way. So I think, from a junior lawyer perspective, if you can get the gift of giving education upwards in a way that is, collaborative and doesn't make the person who's more senior to you feel vulnerable, or as I think you've got a real chance there of being able to change things slowly but surely. But I love the point that Nick made about, find the things that work, find the case studies that work. because we've talked about lots of the challenges, haven't we, in terms of embedding this, and who's to say that senior leaders have all of the answers to those challenges? You know, maybe juniors can help by finding solutions to those challenges and presenting both sides of the challenge to them. I think all of the questions have been answered now, or certainly in terms of the amount of time that we've got left. We will have to draw it to a close, I'm afraid. I'd like to finish this evening by offering my tremendous thanks to all of the panelists this evening. And I'm sure if we were holding this in a much more traditional setting, the audience would be giving you a resounding round of applause at this point. Thank you all, and thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us this evening. We hope that you have enjoyed it, and bye for now.